Guessing this is the clicker. Perfect. Well, thanks everybody for having me here today, and for Paul for the intro there. Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit today about just the overview on CTV, where we've come kind of over the last couple of years, and then maybe some points on where we might be going over the next few. So first up, I am Ed Mullins. I'm the Director of Inventory and Partnerships at StackAdapt in EMEA. That essentially means that from our perspective on our role, I essentially oversee the strategy for the inventory side and then the operational side for the business. We're a multi-channel DSP. We've got about 20,000 brands that use the platform globally. One of the focus points on my role specifically, and the team here in EMEA, is essentially how do we work for audiences within our client base for the future? So essentially, how do we make sure that in the future we're able to address as much of the audience for our clients as possible, and make sure that we're able to do it in as many channels as possible? Before we go into any of the future points, I wanted to just touch on essentially where we are in the ecosystem today and then how we've got there. We're pretty lucky in Europe to have some really strong broadcast businesses that have got a real legacy in linear TV. Over the last couple of years, though, that hasn't really been what's driven the growth within CTV itself. What we've been looking at really is essentially the influx of content providers and streaming services as they come to the market. What's been dubbed the golden era of streaming is essentially what that encompasses. So we've been quite fortunate to have lots of content production provided for us with more and more streaming services with very, very little cost. That started to transition now outside of what we might call the golden era of streaming and towards maybe like a price war between those streaming giants. One of those big moments that we've had over the last few years is essentially revenue growth from those streaming platforms and businesses. There's three main, well, maybe not three main, but three, in my mind, revenue models for these streaming services to go down. One is net new subscriber growth. We've obviously seen that decline over the last few years. Apart from that perspective, in terms of how do we build that subscriber growth, or how do they build that subscriber growth, it really comes down to probably production of content, which is incredibly expensive. The second part being, how do those streaming services actually start to add advertisement to the platform to essentially reduce the subscriber cost but increase the ability to make money, which is obviously being helped quite a lot by the programmatic ecosystem to actually make that biddable. So from our side on the programmatic space, it's essentially how do we help those different brands from a publishing perspective start to drive that revenue biddably from a programmatic ecosystem. But what does that market actually look like at the moment in the present? Something like that. So there's essentially a few different ways that you could break these different content streams down. I think I've chose these 3 or 4 as a quite easy way to actually pull that apart. You've got the AVOD and the FAST channels together, essentially advertiser-funded video on demand. So we're looking there at the Disneys, Discoveries, Netflixes, etc. And then you've got the FAST channels, which is the free ad-supported streaming services or streaming TV. And that would be the Pluto and the Roku of that slide there. Then we've got the broadcasters. As I said, a pretty strong broadcaster base here in the UK. And there's a number on there. Obviously, the BBC unaddressable from an advertising perspective for us in the UK. But they've been really leaning quite heavily into how do they build those historically linear TV buys into the online video on demand platform. Third one being the OEMs. Not by any means the only OEMs that are on there, but just a couple of the examples here. This is essentially the actual TV device manufacturers themselves. They've been really leaning in terms of building and licensing content from different, whether broadcasters or content houses, to build their own individual channel offerings and then start to serve advertisement against those. One really important distinction to make with the OEMs is looking at the different data sets that they have. So the ACR data that they have available to them would be what they would call their first-party data, enabling really them to offer some sort of additional benefit beyond just content stream. We can't really talk about just CTV from this perspective without really looking at something fun like this. So what is actually CTV? And this is a bit of a contentious topic a lot of the time. You've got connected TV here on the left-hand side of this slide at least, essentially the devices themselves from within that streaming. So is it a TV, is it OT or smart TV, the streaming sticks and the consoles that are plugged into the TVs. And then you've got OTT devices on the right. So we're looking here at tablets, mobiles and desktops, any other devices that could do that. The contentious part here is essentially what defines CTV. If you've got premium AVOD content, but you're watching it on a laptop or a mobile, does that still constitute connected television? Or does that somehow fall underneath that bracket of mobile VOD? The reality of this is that people aren't single-channel consumers. We all have our own different viewing habits and our viewing patterns, which is really important to understand as we start to plan campaigns with agencies and with the brands that we work with. What is the goal that we're actually trying to achieve with this campaign, and who are we trying to reach? For example, on my side, and I'm going to shoehorn this in, I'm a big West Ham fan. I have been far bigger on consumption of Discovery Plus over the last few years, or not as we've been in the European competitions. That's going to stop this year. But that really changes the ability to reach me and an audience in that environment, because I'd be watching that maybe on my phone at 5 p.m. after work and not necessarily on a TV at home. We've seen a lot of this growth as well from the actual connected devices themselves. So 4 out of 5 households in Europe now have connected TVs, and in the UK we're at 9, on average, 9 devices per household that are connected to the internet. So this really offers a remarkable opportunity to actually address some of those audiences for advertisers. And I think it's not necessarily just for advertisers that have historically been buying linear TV, but we're actually now able to do that for advertisers that haven't been able to dip a toe into that pond before. And the reality here is that with that additional data and inventory that's now available, CTV probably has an opportunity to do what traditional linear television might not necessarily have been able to do, which is essentially to continue providing advertisement around premium content that we expect on TVs, but now also do that with relevant advertisement from a personified perspective for individual users. That's obviously a bit of a pipe dream, but that's the future that we're obviously building towards here. And the relevancy part is incredibly important here. So here's a stat from Barb around the top 30 shows over the last year. This is all individuals that have been viewed on TVs. And you can see the huge skew here towards broadcaster video. So this is essentially content that's been streamed or watched on a TV across broadcaster channels. And there's a massive skew towards that from the AVOD side. But the reality of this is that when we start to look at the audience of the future, this massively changes again. So you start to see here that the broadcast side versus the AVOD and SVOD side is completely different, almost the polar opposite of each other, which is really important to remember when you're looking at audiences from 16 to 34, that those actual audience demographics and the viewership is starting to change. So from a brand's perspective, why does any of this matter? The reality is that if you're starting to try and address those audiences of the future, you need to be where they're actually consuming content. The slide before, from the Barb's perspective, in terms of what they're actually digesting and viewing and how they're viewing it, really starts to show that programmatic CTV and CTV as a whole from an AVOD and an SVOD perspective is really where that viewership is changing to be on the VOD perspective. So with that shift away from linear viewing and towards decision-based consumption of media, the additional opportunity to actually advertise to those consumers in their future states is going to be pretty key. You've also got that ability to now target and deliver advertisement around really relevant cultural moments. We've started to see those big shows that are coming around from the AVOD and the SVOD perspective, whether it be The Bear, Clarkson's Farm, or Baby Reindeer, but you're actually now able to address some of those audiences in that pop culture moment and start to work with the sentiment around the content, not necessarily just the content itself. So how do we actually start to take advantage in this different boom of streaming? We've obviously gone through a bit there in terms of how we've got to this streaming depth and the additional inventory that's now available. But the reality is that while CTV audiences are actually still capturing more and more attention from the audiences themselves, we're still left a little bit with the reality that this is branded advertisement. There's a really interesting stat from the most recent ThinkBox TV study that cited a report that for search performance, they expect it to be 190% overestimated the performance from a search perspective versus TV, which has 90% underestimation, which is obviously quite an important perspective because as we start in 2023 to really drive 2024 to drive some of this forward, the reality is that overperformance on search is something that we all need to think about. Is it actually driving people towards the development that we're actually looking for, or is that just where the last attribution touches? One of the different content viewership changes that we're seeing as well is this rise of the second screen. So there's a great LG study that was put out earlier in the year that suggested that 93% of people watching on TVs now have a second screen in their hand as well. So the reality is here, you're going to have to become a lot more creative with the advertisement that we're doing to actually start to cut through some of that noise. Utilizing different channels is obviously a great way to do that, and it will obviously start to enhance the performance from your side in terms of an advertiser and a brand's perspective. And we start to see as well within that CTV audience shift, from our side, we've got a great study. We saw 10% of audiences reachable via CTV on an average campaign. But when you start to include different channels alongside that obviously starts to snowball the growth of your ability to reach those audiences. So in this example, adding display to the campaign made you able to reach 85% of the total audience available. This also means you can start to do different things, looking at sequential messaging, retargeting, and really starting to hit people in that bottom of the funnel barrel where CTV might not necessarily have been easily attributable. This is a bit of a light-hearted one here, but this is an ad I saw on LinkedIn the other day. I think the reality that this is in here because the slogan Specsavers has been being used for about 20 years now, and I think it's pretty ingrained in the cultural ethos from a British perspective. I'm pretty sure all of you could probably tell me what that slogan is. The reason I wanted to use this is because this isn't a TV ad and it isn't a video ad, but a lot of that background work has been done by TV and by video. The brand awareness that's been built over the years with that slogan has been done with predominantly video advertising. So it's quite interesting to see that although this might not actually be the attributable part that TV would get in terms of performance, TV's performance or role in the performance is still pretty big. And that goes just as strong for CTV as it does with TV because we're all so engaged in these moments. There's a couple of realistic problems that we can look at actually changing here. So over the next few years, there's probably 3 big things that I imagine will actually look to change. One of those being the fragmentation of industry and on the inventory side itself. So the first side here is that we've got a lot of different publishers, as you could see from that slide before, and a lot of different devices that we're actually working on here. A lot of the data that we're seeing from publishers is starting to get better and better in terms of the content that we're going to be working towards, which means that we're able to report a lot better back to brands and buyers around what is working, what isn't working. The OTT and CTV devices themselves as well also pose challenges at the moment in that different bundle IDs don't necessarily come back as the same publisher from different TVs, which is, again, a challenge for reporting. But as we start to pull all of these different things and threads together, we'll be able to become a lot more addressable in that space. The lack of standardization and measurements is something that's definitely looking to be changed as well. We're obviously working now with the IAB on the framework from a CTV measurement perspective and from a standardization of that. So having that into the future will be a great moment as well. One of the final things I'm looking at now is one of the things actually I love to talk about from an audience perspective when we're talking to brands and agencies is specifically what are you trying to achieve? So I'd say there's 3 different things. Are you looking for audiences? Are you looking for devices? Or are you looking for content? I.e., if you're looking at TV devices only, do the publishers only matter? Or can we spread that across multiple different content providers? And if you're looking at content only, does it matter that it's on a TV and a phone or a laptop and a TV? Can we start to be a bit more fluid with that? And then finally, on to the future. With the effectiveness of upper funnel CTV advertising still pretty much in question, I'd like you all to think and go away from here thinking about the best advertisement that you've actually seen. I would imagine that has probably been made for TV, and I'd guarantee it's a video, at least. The reality is that this is really engaging content, and you are really engaging with audience members. And holistically, there are different approaches to take in order trying to drive different people down funnel, and that's what different channels are there for, and that's what an omni-channel strategy or multi-channel strategy really enables us to do. We'll probably start to see shoppable ads as we move into the future as well. I know it's something that Gubbins has spoke about probably previously as well. But really, my final point being that both for brand building and for the return on investment, brand building's whole point is to get consumers to that final point, whether that's the shop floor or the search ad, and then get them there with a decision in their mind about the brand that you're advertising. So really, TV offers an amazing opportunity for all of us to actually get there. Thank you. Thank you.